September 19th, 1992. In Australia, two orienteers discover the body of a young woman in dense forest. Nearby, police uncover another shallow grave.
These two bodies were found on makeshift altars. These girls had been savagely murdered.
Detectives are soon searching for one of Australia's most notorious criminals, known as the Backpacker Killer.
What we had now was a lot of speculation in the media about a serial killer, about how many more bodies were buried in the bush, and a large amount of fear.
As the death toll climbed, this story took on a huge new momentum of its own. There was a media frenzy. This had everything. You know, it had blood and gore, it had human emotion. No one knew who the killer was.
Along with police, there are those who chronicle the investigation up close, on film, on paper, and on tape. They are the public's first witness. Through their eyes, they capture our darkest chapters of crime.
What's up, Panic Fam? I'm Hannah, and if it's 2 a.m., the lights are off and the popcorn has gone cold, you know, it's Panic TV time. Welcome. If you survived this, and this, congratulations, all right? Congratulations, but your luck runs out here.
With its warm climate and open spaces, Australia has been a popular tourist destination for decades. Many international travelers stay in large hotels and take organized tours of famous landmarks. But in the late 1980s, a growing number of young visitors began arriving here with little more than a pack on their backs, hoping to explore the vast country on a shoestring budget.
Australia was just beginning to take off as a favorite destination for backpackers. So you get a lot of kids suddenly landing in Australia to spend 3 months, 6 months, do a bit of work, earn some money on the way, and see Australia at the same time.
Many backpackers feel hitchhiking is the best way to get around the country. Not only is it free, but it's also a great way to meet local Australians. Getting into a stranger's car, however, comes with its own set of risks.
There were lots of young people hitchhiking, particularly overseas tourists, young overseas tourists. The problem was that there are a disturbingly large number of hitchhikers, not just in Australia but around the world, who just disappeared.
In the early 1990s, hitchhikers became the prime target in a series of shocking, brutal crimes. April 1992. 22-year-old Joanne Walters from Wales is one of many tourists staying in a popular backpackers hostel in the coastal city of Sydney. In order to save up more money to keep backpacking, she has picked up temporary work as a nanny for a local family.
I liked Joanne instantly because she had a lovely smile, but also she reminded me of my own daughters. She was easy to get on with and she was polite and spoke very well. Nicholas took to her straight away. Joanne was such a nice girl.
One of Joanne's newest friends is another backpacker named Caroline Clark, also staying at the hostel.
There was a great similarity between the girls in as much that they love life, and they were very feisty, they're very cheeky, and had a great sense of humour, and they got on really well together. And they built up this really strong friendship.
Having spent several weeks in Sydney, the two girls decide to take off together and do some more exploring.
She was a backpacker and that was the thing to do. And she was happy, but, you know, a little bit sad at leaving.
April 18th, Joanne and Caroline strap on their backpacks and leave the hostel, planning to hitchhike south on a well-known stretch of highway.
Caroline and Joanne went backpacking and hitching along a main road, thinking that they were safe and not really thinking about the possible dangers, because the people they'd met in Sydney were friendly and Australia is a very welcoming place. But that very fact had lulled them into a false sense of security, and they thought that they were safer than they really were. And as we now know, they were in mortal danger.
May 1992. Over a month has passed since the two young women left Sydney. Back in Wales, Joanne's parents begin to worry about their distant daughter.
She always would ring her parents on a fairly regular basis, and several weeks had gone past without any kind of contact being made at all between Joanne and her family.
Their alarm grows when they learn that Joanne's bank account hasn't been touched in over a month. A phone call from Joanne's mother to Australia reveals that Joanne's former employer hasn't heard from her either.
From when she left here, she was going to send me cards and, you know, note, and I felt sure I would hear. But when I didn't hear, she was such a reliable girl, I was suspicious immediately.
Shortly after that, the Clarks, Caroline Clark's parents, made it known that they were also very worried about their daughter.
Joanne and Caroline are promptly reported missing to Australian police. Joanne's parents fly to Sydney, where they visit hostels and put up missing persons posters, searching for any information about the girls' whereabouts.
They went on a lot of television shows in Australia to try to gain a bit of publicity, and they had a huge response. Hundreds of people all around Australia rang in with tips, thinking that they might have seen these two girls hitching, but unfortunately none of those tips actually came to anything.
Their parents try to remain hopeful, despite growing fears that the girls may be the victims of foul play.
It was a very difficult time. They, hoped that there would be a happy outcome. But I knew in myself that if she were free, she would be able to go and make a phone call. So I had a feeling she was not free.
September 19th, 1992. In Belanglo State Forest, a 2-hour drive southwest of Sydney, two members of an orienteering club make their way through dense brush.
It's a very, very creepy place, the Belanglo State Forest. It's a quite eerie area.
They'd stopped by a large boulder to check their bearings, and they smelt something rotten, something decomposing, a decomposing animal, and whilst they were stopped there, they decided to have a look to see what it was.
The two men make an unexpected and terrible discovery. In a makeshift grave, they see what appears to be human remains. They head out of the forest and call police. Local officers attend to the remote scene, followed by detectives. Another body is discovered nearby.
These bodies weren't in holes as such. They were hidden, however. They'd been covered over with branches, twigs, leaves, and so on.
Forensic experts preserve the disturbing scene on film. With the area marked off, they begin to uncover the bodies, branch by branch.
We didn't know who they were at that stage. We knew their approximate age and the fact they were both female, and it was suspected at that time that they were the missing Clark and Walters from Britain.
Items of clothing and jewelry soon confirm suspicions. By all appearances, Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark have been murdered. Back in Sydney, Joanne's parents' worst fears are realized.
It was while they were out here that the bodies were discovered. Yes. Yeah, it's a sad time. It's very hard to do anything to console someone like that.
In the morgue, a post-mortem exam reveals the brutal nature of the crime. Joanne's body bears 14 stab wounds from a large hunting knife. As for Caroline Clark, cloth around her head suggests strangulation, but x-rays reveal bullets inside of her skull.
As a result of the examination, Caroline Clark had been shot 10 times in the head with a small caliber weapon, a .22 caliber firearm. And within her head, we recovered 7 .22 caliber spent bullets.
Even for those accustomed to investigating crime, the double murder is exceptionally violent.
All 10 shots are directly into the head. Any one of those 10 would have been fatal. So the fact that 10 shots were fired is very much a case of overkill. It really indicates a savagery which you just don't often come across. The next day we attended the Belanglo State Forest where she was found, and we sifted the soil underneath where her head had lain. In that process we recovered another 3 spent bullets, which indicated to us that she'd been murdered at the location she was found.
Although DNA science is still in its infancy, police search for biological evidence left behind by the killer, both on the bodies and at the crime scene. But the passage of almost 5 months since the likely time of death means any that existed may have deteriorated. The recovered bullets may be the one connection to the killer. While police search for more clues, the entire country reels from the shocking news.
Of course, once that came out, then the story took on a whole new momentum. But they were 2 fun-loving girls, and they obviously had a great time when they were in Australia. And then suddenly, of course, it all came to a terrible halt. These girls had been savagely murdered, and it was a very grisly business.
Joanne's parents addressed the Australian people in an emotional press conference.
They were utterly and completely wrecked. I remember Mr. Walters saying something like, whoever did this is an animal. They need to be killed. They need to be destroyed.
Because the world hasn't got the resources to keep putting these people in jail.
And that mood was reflected too by Mrs. Walters, who said a few words before being led away. She just couldn't talk anymore.
At the same time, some fear this may not be an isolated incident. Joanne and Caroline aren't the only backpackers to have mysteriously disappeared in the past few years.
At that stage, the police were not willing to accept that a serial killer was on the loose. They only had 2 bodies. They knew there were a number of other backpackers missing, but backpackers go missing all the time. And they weren't prepared to accept at that stage that there might be a serial killer around.
In the months ahead, more gruesome facts will come to light, turning the double murder investigation into a hunt for one of Australia's most terrifying killers. September 1992. In southeastern Australia, police are investigating the brutal double murder of British backpackers Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark, last seen alive while heading out to hitchhike near Sydney. In the dense brush of Belanglo State Forest, officers search a corridor 500 feet wide and more than 1 kilometer long, looking for any other clues. An expert profiler is brought to the crime scene to help police get a better understanding of the killer.
Dr. Rod Milton was one of the forensic psychiatrists for the police. He suggested the person was more likely to have been in their 40s or 50s. In terms of more the personality, he suggested the person would be A loner would be a control freak. It was quite clear from where the bodies were in the forest that the person or persons had a very good knowledge of the forest. It was almost certain that they had a four-wheel drive, and that raised a question as to whether or not they lived in the general area, or at least visited it.
Officers speak with locals and come up with a list of people known to frequent the forest. They also compile a list of locals with violent criminal records. As the days pass, many persons of interest surface, but no concrete suspects. For many, the most promising lead to date lies in the bullets recovered from the murder scene. Ballistics expert 𝙀𝙧𝙀𝙧𝙀 carries out his work in the lab.
As a result of recovering the bullets and cartridge cases, one of the first things the investigators want to know is what kind of firearm could have discharged these. I was able to narrow down the type of gun that we were looking for. I was quite happy it was a Ruger model 1022 self-loading rifle.
Beyond the make and model, a closer examination reveals the unique markings of the murder weapon itself. Microscopic imperfections in manufacturing give each weapon a fingerprint of sorts.
You can't make two things exactly identical. It just, it's impossible. They can look very similar and look alike, but through the microscope there are differences, and it's those differences between each gun which allow us to prove identity.
The ballistics evidence will now allow police to identify the specific murder weapon through a test fire, but only if they can track it down first. Import records show that 50,000 Ruger 22 rifles exist in Australia.
I was able to check any other guns of the same model that came to our laboratory, and I would all compare them against the murder exhibits in the hope, a very slim hope, that by chance we'd come across the murder weapon, but that's always a very slight chance.
As the weeks pass, the lead involving the Ruger rifle grows cold.
And it came to the point where this seemed to be just another double homicide which was going to remain unsolved. That all changed, of course, when they found more bodies in the Belanglo State Forest.
October 5th, 1993. A man gathering wood stumbles across a stone fire pit. Walking nearby, he finds what appears to be a human skull. The man leads police back to the remote location, where they find two more makeshift human graves, almost identical to those of Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark.
They'd been put into very shallow graves, covered by a lot of sticks and leaf litter.
Using dental records, the victims are identified as James Gibson and Deborah Everest, two friends last seen on December 30th, 1989. And just like Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark, they mysteriously disappeared after leaving Sydney with plans to hitchhike south. Both had been stabbed numerous times by a large hunting knife, like the one used on Joanne Walters. News of more bodies in Belanglo Forest spreads fast, rattling not just nearby residents, but the entire country. In the face of growing fear, police set up an enlarged task force headed by Superintendent Clive Small.
On my arrival down there was already a very large media contingent. What we had now was a lot of speculation in the media about a serial killer, about how many more bodies were buried in the bush, and a large amount of fear. It was realised that in order to determine that there were no more bodies secreted in the forest, that a very extensive search would have to be carried out of as much of the Belanglo Forest as possible. We had to make sure that we didn't miss anything this time. So what we did was we had aerial photographs of the area, we had satellite photographs of the area, we plotted an area and worked out that we would need around about 300 police to carry out the search.
November 1st, 1993. As police move into the final section of their search plan, they come across more ominous signs. First, a pair of women's pants, then some rope and wire, as well as a makeshift fire pit. As feared, police find another pile of branches covering human remains. Dental charts identify the body as belonging to missing backpacker 𝐂𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐞 𝐒𝐿 from Germany, also killed by a large hunting knife. Like the others, 𝐂𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐞 𝐒𝐿 had also left Sydney with plans to hitchhike when she too had disappeared.
However, only 3 days after finding her body, the 6th and 7th bodies were found.
In the same area of forest, police find 2 more makeshift graves and 2 more missing backpackers. Gabor Neugebauer and Anya Habschied, both of Germany, disappeared under very similar circumstances. The scene reveals new levels of brutality.
Anya was, she'd been murdered by decapitation. Neugebauer had been shot numerous times in the head, again with a small caliber weapon.
Police are unable to find Anya's head, which may have been taken from the scene by the killer.
There was an enormous amount of objects that were found in the area. There was a very intricate restraint device that was found, which involved leather binding and rope. There was the plastic cable ties.
The discovery of 3 more bodies in close succession pushes the media coverage into overdrive.
As the death toll climbed, I suppose, this story took on a huge new momentum of its own.
At the time, Dean Sewell is a photographer working with the Sydney Morning Herald.
I mean, choppers were going crazy. It was only a 25-minute helicopter flight out of Sydney. And so we, instead of jumping in cars, we'd fly down by helicopter. We found the forensic teams actually uncovering one of the bodies, and we hovered over them for a while, taking pictures. That gave us a front page of the actual, forensic teams at work.
Police are now tracking one of the worst serial killers in Australian history, now dubbed the Backpacker Killer.
There was a media frenzy, no doubt about it. This had everything. It had blood and gore, it had real human emotion.
It totally gripped the nation, really, because we hadn't had anything like this in living memory, at least.
We now had 7 known backpackers whose bodies were littered across the Belanglo State Forest. This wasn't just a plain, straightforward murder. It really was an awful fate for these poor people. Some of them were just brutally stabbed to death, some of them were shot, but they were all viciously assaulted. Quite clearly, the police had to accept by this stage that something terrible was going on, that there was a man on the loose who was responsible for all this.
November 8th, 1993. In southeastern Australia, a growing task force is searching for a brutal serial killer, now dubbed the Backpacker Killer.
Ugh, I swear my neighbors think I'm probably getting murdered right now.
We've got 7 murder victims with no suspects, and the pressure was on the police to solve this and to come up with a killer.
The killer appears to target hitchhikers along the main highway heading south from Sydney. He likely offers them a friendly ride before brutally murdering them in nearby Belanglo State Forest, knowing that their distance from home will give him time to cover his tracks.
He knew that it would be some time before anybody realized they were missing.
A new toll-free phone line is set up to help coordinate tips from the public. 5,000 calls come in the first day.
The police were overwhelmed with information and tips. It was really like looking for a needle in a haystack.
At the same time, the latest crime scene where German backpackers Gabor Neugebauer and Anya Habschied were found produces a wealth of new ballistics evidence. Although the bullets found in 𝐂𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐻 body are too corroded for analysis, others turn up a short walk away.
Found an area which was basically an old campsite with some old embers and various rubbish, but most interesting from my point of view was the fact that we found a number of .22 calibre fired cartridge cases. We found 47 Winchester fired cartridge cases and 46 𝐂𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐻 brand fired cartridge cases.
In the lab, a microscopic examination of the Winchester casings reveals the firing pin impression of a Ruger 22 rifle, the same model of weapon used to kill British backpacker Caroline Clarke. Closer inspection of unique marks prove it is the exact same gun.
Now we could draw a definite conclusion that the same person had been involved in at least 2 sets of murders.
But being able to recognize the murder weapon is still of little help unless they can first track it down. Police begin cross-checking the list of thousands of Ruger owners across the country with all persons of interest. At the same time, they test fire and examine as many weapons as they can get their hands on.
I'd looked at test firings from over 700 Ruger rifles, and that process is very much like walking down a street of a city you've never been in. Everyone's a stranger. If you knew that someone you knew was in amongst this whole crowd of people, you'd be on the lookout for it and looking for those familiar features. Well, the microscopic marks on the cartridge cases were like a very familiar face to me, and so I knew that in amongst all of the Ruger rifles out there, that there was one, the murder gun, would leave marks which I'd immediately be able to identify. You're looking and looking and looking and hoping that you can find this needle in a haystack, in fact.
At the same time, detectives continue to receive a daunting amount of information, both on persons of interest as well as other missing persons cases.
Within 3 months, those pieces of information had grown from around about 7,000 pieces to about 1.5 million pieces of information.
It is while sifting through all of this data that detectives notice an intriguing pattern. One local family with the surname Milat seems to have been named in numerous tips from the public. Indeed, the large family is well known in the area, particularly the many Milat brothers.
There were a number of calls from people who put the Milat, various members of the Milat family forward for various reasons. Quite a number of the brothers were gun fanatics, for example.
They owned a property just south of Sydney where they had a shooting range where a lot of them would go and test out weapons and or go shooting for wild pigs or kangaroos.
The family generally was regarded by a number of people as being strange and unusual, and there had been, it was said, these various comments by different Milat brothers about the murders in the Belanglo Forest.
One brother, 49-year-old Ivan Milat, is the subject of a few of these different tips. Ivan lives near Sydney and works for the local Roads and Traffic Authority.
He didn't have a large number of friends. He was a bit of a loner. He was very much into physical fitness, but he was very strong and very slim. He had one of those bars for weightlifting where he'd actually manufactured his own concrete weights to put onto the bar. He had many, many guns and a vast amount of ammunition.
But despite his love of firearms, Ivan Milat seems to lead a relatively peaceful existence.
You know, he used to go off building roads and repairing roads and this sort of thing. But he lived a fairly comfortable life, quite sort of middle-class life.
But looking closer at Ivan Milat, detectives make an interesting discovery.
On every single one of the days that these deceased backpackers had disappeared, Ivan Milat had a day off.
When the Milat family first came on the radar, a routine search into Ivan's past showed no violent crimes. But now, looking deeper in old records, police make a shocking discovery, one dating back almost 20 years. Although never convicted, Ivan Milat was once charged with a violent crime involving hitchhikers.
In the early 70s, Ivan was picked up after he had abducted and allegedly raped 2 young girls. Now, he beat the matter at trial, but there was no argument about the general facts of the matter. So there was a case where Ivan, almost 20 years before this series of cases, had abducted 2 women.
Ivan rapidly became their prime suspect.
With no evidence tying Ivan Milat to the recent murders, police can do little more than keep an eye on him, all the while pursuing other persons of interest. Before long, a tip from England will break the entire case wide open. April 1994. Australia is gripped by a string of shocking crimes known as the backpacker murders. 7 hitchhikers, many of them foreigners, are dead. Though police have yet to tie him to the crimes, a local man named Ivan Milat is now a prime suspect.
Unfortunately, they had no evidence against him. They were pretty sure he was their man, but they still didn't have any DNA, they didn't have any firearms or anything like that to link him with the crime.
While some detectives keep Milat under watch, others continue to filter through the wealth of information collected from the public. It is here that they find a riveting statement submitted by phone from England. A man named Paul Onions, who became aware of the backpacker murders through the international media coverage, claims he may have actually had a terrifying first-hand encounter with the killer. He refers to a backpacking trip he took to Australia in January of 1990. He was hitchhiking near Sydney when a man in a 4-wheel drive, who gave his name only as Bill, offered him a lift.
He chatted with the man, and then at a particular point, Paul Onions noticed that the atmosphere suddenly changed. And the man became very sullen.
And then suddenly the driver of the car turned the radio down and said that he had to stop the car to get some cassettes from underneath his seat.
The man stopped his car on the side of the road. He rummaged around underneath the driver's seat, pulled out a handgun, and at first, Paul Onions thought, this is a robbery. Then he saw the man pull out what looked like a pillow slip, and he started taking some rope out of this pillow slip. Every bone in his body told him this is not just a simple robbery, this is something far, far worse.
Instinctively, he got out of the car and started running, zigzagging, to avoid the bullets that were being fired at him. Eventually, the driver caught up with Paul Onions, pulled him down to the ground.
They were fighting on the ground on the side of the busiest highway in Australia.
And Paul Onions realises that his only hope, if he's going to save his life, is to try and flag down another motorist to get help. And it was a choice between either being shot by this guy or being run over. And this woman saw what was happening and slowed down to see what was going on. Paul Onions ran up to her, opened the door and said, "Help me, help me."
This man's got a gun, this man's got a gun. Please drive away, back up, back up.
The gunman realised that the game was over and started running back to his car.
At the time, Paul Onions reported the incident to local police, who saw it as little more than a foiled robbery. Now, 3 years later, detectives are convinced that Paul Onions came face to face with the backpacker killer. They fly him to Australia to interview him again in detail and see if he can help identify a dangerous serial killer.
Paul Onions was then shown still images of 12 different people. And one of those images was Ivan Milat. And he was able to identify Ivan Milat as the man who had attempted to abduct him.
At that point, our efforts focused on Ivan almost exclusively.
Although police can now arrest Ivan for the attempted armed robbery of Paul Onions, they still have no direct evidence tying him to the recent killings. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Rod Milton suggests that police may find all the evidence they need inside their suspect's home.
We had the advice of Rod Milton that the person would almost certainly have kept souvenirs from the murders, and that was a crucial thing to say, I don't think we can take this much further. I think we should go in.
May 22nd, 1994. Knowing they need to act fast, police decide to execute search warrants on a number of Milat family properties simultaneously, the prime target being the home of Ivan Milat himself. The local press gets a tip on the pending pre-dawn raid.
We were in position, I think, at around about 3 o'clock in the morning, a couple of hours at least before sunrise, and we were just to keep a really low profile.
Detectives know that everything hinges on the next few hours. If they turn up evidence, one of Australia's worst crime sprees may be over. If they don't, the backpacker killer, whoever he is, will remain free to strike again. May 22nd, 1994. Near Sydney, Australia, police are ready to move in on 49-year-old local resident Ivan Milat. He is wanted for the attempted robbery of a British hitchhiker and is now the prime suspect in a series of brutal murders. So far, no direct evidence ties him to the killings, but detectives are gambling that a search of his home will turn up the proof they need. At dawn, they make their move.
After his house had been secured, 2 detectives from the task force basically arrested him, but he wasn't taken out of his house for a little while. We wanted just to see if there was anything obvious we could find within the house before he was taken to the police station.
Although Ivan Milat claims he is innocent of any crimes, it isn't long before detectives make some interesting discoveries. First, a postcard to a man named Bill, the name used by Paul Onion's abductor. Inside a work-related book, police find a manual for a Ruger .22 rifle, the kind of weapon used in 2 of the murders.
We found a lot of very good evidence in the house. There was also any number of firearm-related items there, such as ammunition, gun-related books, all sorts of stuff.
Then, in Ivan Milat's attic, police uncover what is clearly a carefully hidden cache.
One of the detectives was in the ceiling cavity, searching between the ceiling and the roof. About 1 metre down inside the wall cavity was a plastic bag, and when he recovered the bag and had a look inside, he called out for me to come and have a look. And I can recall looking inside that bag and being tremendously excited, because inside that bag were components of a Ruger Model 1022 rifle. I was intimately familiar with components of a Ruger rifle by that stage, and so when I saw those that had been found, I was very excited.
Although test firing will be needed for proof, police feel they may have just found a key murder weapon. Before he is taken away, Ivan Milat is told of the find.
And he was asked about that, but he denied any knowledge of it, and in fact suggested that the police had put it there.
In the lab, after looking at hundreds of different test firings over the previous months, ballistics expert Gerard Dutton hopes the search is finally over.
I can distinctly remember feeling very excited sitting at the comparison microscope with my test-fired cartridge cases on one side, on one stage, and cartridge cases found at the Clark murder scene on the other. As I started to adjust the light and the magnification, even within seconds, I distinctly remember all of the hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. In fact, all the way down my spine. A very freaky sensation which I've never experienced before, because all of a sudden I could see that those marks I was so familiar with, and there was no doubt about it that that breech bolt we found in the wall cavity had been fitted to the murder gun. Now we could draw a direct link between something from Ivan Milat's house to two of the murder scenes. That was a very important link.
While police search for more clues on Milat family property, news of an arrest in the backpacker murder case spreads quickly across the country.
The relief when the Milat family were identified, and in fact when Ivan Milat was charged, was huge.
But in police custody, Ivan Milat continues to deny any involvement in the crimes.
I think he thought at the end of the day he would beat the charge.
But as the days unfold, evidence against him continues to mount. Perhaps most incriminating is the discovery of items that belong to the murder victims themselves.
A significant amount of camping equipment that were carried by the missing people that were found at premises of Ivan's house and other premises owned by Ivan's family. And we were able to do physical comparisons of the actual camping items that had been found in Ivan's possession with photographs supplied by the families of the missing people, mainly Simone Schmidl and Carolyn Clark.
In one instance, investigators use a special poly light to examine scratch marks on a water bottle.
We looked at that closely. We could see the word SIMI, S-I-M-I, that had actually been sanded out of the plastic. And we got really, really excited because we knew Simone Schmidl's nickname was Simi. We located a backpack at one of Ivan's relatives' places in the Southern Highlands. We've got photos of Simone Schmidl holding that backpack when she was getting onto a train in Germany. In photographs of Carolyn Clark, you can see her in possession of a camera in the top of some of her backpack. We found a camera in the possession of Ivan Milat and determined that that camera had never been sold in Australia in that batch of serial numbers, and it had actually been sold in England.
In March 1996, Ivan Milat finally stands trial, charged with 7 counts of murder. An entire nation follows the news as the accused backpacker killer finally faces a court of justice. Over the next 12 weeks, the prosecution explains to the jury that the average-looking man in the prisoner box is actually one of Australia's worst serial killers. Over the course of 3 years, on certain days off from work, Ivan Milat would cruise the highways south of Sydney and pick up hitchhikers, whom he would then murder with extreme brutality.
At the trial, I didn't even look at him. I didn't want to look at him. Didn't want to see his face. I think he's a complete maniac.
Having sat next to or close to Ivan, you'd never guess that this man was a psychopath or had the power or the ability to carry out such evil deeds. And they really were evil deeds.
Partway through the trial, the accused takes the stand in his own defense.
He gave evidence denying that he was responsible for any of the deaths and denying that he was the person who had attempted to abduct Paul Onions.
Ivan Milat's only explanation for the evidence against him is that someone else may have set him up.
The defence case at trial was this. It was definitely either one of the Milat brothers or somebody very closely associated with the Milat family, but it was not Ivan. In relation to the Ruger that was found in various parts of his home, he really had no satisfactory explanation at all. He just said, I don't know how that gun came to be in my home. Really didn't have any credibility at all. And ultimately, the jury came to the view that his explanations just didn't make any sense at all.
On July 27, 1996, the jury finds Ivan Milat guilty on all counts. He is sentenced to 7 life terms for the murders of Joanne Walters, Caroline Clark, James Gibson, Deborah Everest, Simone Schmidl, Gabor Neugebauer, and Anya Habschied. He also receives 6 additional years for the attack on Paul Onions. Although the verdict brings some degree of closure, nothing can undo the brutal carnage carried out in the depths of Belanglo State Forest.
If you could slap one character for their dumb decisions, who would it be? Huh? Go on. Vent in the comments. I can't wait to read.
So many people had their lives destroyed or traumatized anyway over a period of time, all as a result of one man's deeds.
How sad they must be still feeling and how long-lasting the grief is for the parents. You would never be able to forget that in your life.
Today, Ivan Milat remains behind bars in Australia, where he continues to deny any involvement in the 7 brutal murders. Few, however, believe him.
The types of crimes that he committed were, in my view, amongst the very worst.
He'll never get out of prison, not alive anyway. He's there for life.
Justice is done in Australia.
Be honest. Did you watch the last scene through your fingers? Comment yes or no.